Welcome to Defining Dad Bod, where my dad, Coach Alex Van Houten, posts his 14 years of experience to work for you. You should listen to him. Here's pretty beast mode. Who knows who we could be if we could become 1% better every single day.
What is up, guys? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. I hope you're doing super well. Here we work hard to become 1% better every single day because it affects our communities for us to manifest our best as individuals. And today you're joining us for episode 3 of season 3, which is part 2 of our supplement series. We'll be covering the researched effects of creatine today and the considerations you need to make before you start adding this supplement to your workout program. It's one of my favorite supplements of all time, and I hope you find this show valuable. With 14 years of coaching experience under my belt, and almost 20 years of personal exercise experience under my belt, this is one of my favorite supplements of all time. So I hope you find this show valuable. Now, anytime I talk about supplements on the show, it's important for me to make a disclaimer. While I'll always cite the research that we mention on the show, you can find those in a link in the show notes below. It's important for you to know that none of this is intended to be medical advice. We do have a registered dietitian on staff, so if you have some medical questions, you're welcome to submit those at coachal@definingdadbod.com. But here in the podcast to our general audience, while I'll mention some medical considerations, things like kidney and liver disease or depression, it's important for you to know that these are health and wellness recommendations by nature, not intended to diagnose or treat medical issues. Now with that out of the way, 2 pieces of housekeeping and we can get to the show. First, throughout the month of July, I am trading a touch-based coaching call to help you strategize your health and fitness program for a raving review on iTunes. If you've been listening to the show and it's added value to your personal health and fitness journey, take a second to rate us 5 stars and tell potential listeners what value Defining Dad Bod has brought to your health and fitness journey. Why do you keep downloading our episodes? And what are we doing in the world that's been valuable to you? If you'll screenshot that review, shoot it to me in email at coachal@definingdadbod.com. I'll send you my touch-base calendar, and we can jump on the phone for 20 minutes and talk through your personal questions about your exercise program and your nutrition program. I offer this primarily because, 1, I really enjoy getting to know our listeners personally, and 2, raving reviews on iTunes are the best way for us to climb to the top of the podcast charts. Doing that makes it easier for people to discover us in the health and fitness and self-help world. And I believe that what we're doing here is valuable enough to make impacts on lives every single day. So if you're game, I greatly appreciate your time. Scroll to the bottom of your podcast app, click review, and then screenshot your written review and email it to me at coachal@definingdadbod.com. I'll reply with a virtual high five, and I'll send you my calendar so you can grab a time to get on the phone. The last time I did this was in February, and it was a blast. I hope you'll take me up on it here in July. The second piece of housekeeping is if you hadn't had a chance to register to get on the interest list for the TrueFit Mastermind coming up in August, now's the time. I've opened 20 spots in this mastermind, and those who participated in our mastermind last year said it was the most valuable purchase they made the entire year with regard to their health and fitness. If you go to definingdadbod.com/truefit, the form at the top of the page will put you on the interest list. It'll take you 30 seconds to fill it out, and then we'll reach out to you with more information as we put out the syllabus and the official registration. That's definingdadbod.com/truefit. I'm really excited about this mastermind. It's going to be an intensive 6 weeks, making the TrueFit series information practical and pertinent to your health and fitness journey. I expect that because of this experience, your approach to exercise and nutrition will never be the same, and it will never have been so well done in your life either. That's definingdadbod.com/truefit. TRUFIT. All right, without further ado, let's get to one of my favorite supplements, creatine. Creatine monohydrate is one of the most well-researched supplements that you can find on the market right now. Today we're going to talk about why it works, what it's not, what researched effects it has on the body, how to take it, how to measure its effects, and then we'll finish with ways that I've used it with my clients in the past. So first, what the heck is it? Well, let's start with what it's not. creatine monohydrate is not a drug or a steroid. When I've recommended it in the past, there have been many people who have asked me, "Oh, is this okay? I don't know if I should be taking it. I've heard it might mess with my testosterone. Or is it like taking steroids? Unless something changes in the relatively near future. I, Coach Alex Van Houten, have never recommended, nor will I ever recommend, steroids or hormone replacement therapy, because both are completely outside of my jurisdiction as a trainer. Creatine is naturally occurring in foods, especially red meats, and is a crucial part of one of our 3 energy subsystems in every single cell of our body. And some of the amazing effects that we can attribute to creatine come from its ability to impact every single cell of the body at such an important level of operation. And so before we get to how it can help you grow more muscle, increase strength, improve power output, or maybe even reduce depression, we need a quick physiology lesson. Your body is composed of cells, and every single cell in your body has hundreds or hundreds of thousands of mitochondria in each cell. Those mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, and their job is to synthesize a compound called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You could think of ATP as the rechargeable battery of your body. Every single chemical reaction that happens in your body requires ATP, from the flexing of muscles to the firing of neurons in your brain to even the peristalsis of your digestive system. The energy required to power those things comes from the molecule adenosine triphosphate. And the way your body accomplishes this is by taking a phosphate off of the triphosphate molecule and harnessing the electrons that come out of that reaction. Adenosine triphosphate then becomes adenosine diphosphate, and boom, whatever reaction that was supposed to happen gets to happen. Fantastic. Wait a second, Alex. I thought we were going to talk about creatine. Yes, you're right, and this is where creatine comes in. Creatine has a very powerful property in that it can hold on to a phosphorus all by itself and save it as a reserve to recharge the adenosine diphosphate back to adenosine triphosphate so that it can be quickly used again for energy when you need it. If you're not much for chemistry, I've explained it like this to my clients in the past. Imagine every cell in your body depends on a molecule that's built like a tricycle, and the way you get energy from that tricycle is by kicking one of the wheels off of it. Creatine is like a storage bin of extra bicycle wheels. The more creatine you have, the faster you can replenish the energy in the cell so that it can be used again to do work for you. The less creatine you have in your cells, the less spare tires available. Therefore, you run out of energy very quickly. Now, that's not a perfect analogy, but I hope that helps you understand if perhaps you're not a biology nerd like I am. The bottom line is this. The more creatine that surrounds your ATP, the more quickly the cell can regenerate energy to be used for immediate reactions. Now, a final note on this particular point. This energy system in the body is responsible primarily for things that take a very short period of time. Namely, creatine phosphate is responsible for the energy output of reactions that last between 1/2 second all the way up to about 10 seconds. And in a bit, when we talk about the research around the increases in strength and power output of those who supplement with creatine, it'll make sense why those effects don't translate to something like marathon running. If you want to see some pictures on this, I did a Google image search for you and posted the link in the description below. All I searched for was creatine phosphagen pathway, and so you can see for yourself how this whole tricycle plus storage of extra wheels things works if you care to. The other very important way that creatine might act on the body, according to the research, is by lowering an enzyme in your body called myostatin. Now, myostatin is a very interesting enzyme because the more of it you have in your body, the less muscle tissue you can grow, which I imagine is why there's no supplement market for myostatin. You can't go to Amazon and buy myostatin in pill form, because if you could, it's literally the pill that if you take it, you will lose muscle tissue. Now, what's interesting about myostatin is every single person seems to have a limit set by their genetic makeup. Those with a lower myostatin limit generally build more muscle tissue more easily. Similarly, there are those with a really high myostatin limit who tend to have a really hard time growing muscle tissue. You can see this in the Olympics, where those genetically predisposed to doing really well in marathons have a very high myostatin amount in their bloodstream, whereas your Olympic powerlifters or sprinters have a very low myostatin amount in their bloodstream. A particularly extreme example of this can be found in cattle that have been bred to get rid of the myostatin gene, and therefore, without lifting weights or eating a lot of protein, they're the most muscular thing you could possibly imagine. I also did a Google image search for you there. I just typed in Belgian blue. Click the link. You'll be pretty amazed, just like I was the first time I saw those cows. #goals. But what does myostatin have to do with creatine supplementation? Well, one of the well-documented effects of creatine supplementation is that it actually lowers the amount of the myostatin enzyme in an individual's body. This is powerful because if myostatin is the enzyme that tells your body your upper limit for muscle tissue, then lowering the amount of that enzyme opens the doors for your body to put on some more muscle tissue. And as we'll see when I summarize the researched effects soon, this has a profound impact on an individual's ability to build muscle tissue in their program. So a quick recap. Creatine is not a steroid, a hormone, or a drug. Creatine is a water-soluble molecule that currently exists in your food and acts on your body at the level of every single cell by supporting ATP. Creatine also can affect the myostatin enzyme. And so understanding these two mechanisms, we can have an intelligent conversation about the researched effects. So, what does research show? Note that not all research is created equal, so I've divided this into 3 categories. First, what we actually know from double-blind placebo randomized controlled trials. These are the gold standards of science. These studies have been replicated over and over to show the potential benefits. Then, there are the subpar research studies that have showed some effects, but we can't be sure yet because they haven't been verified by enough double-blind placebo randomized controlled trials. And then there are those things that we know creatine has no effect on. And then after we talk through the research, I'm going to talk to you about how to take creatine and what considerations might prevent you from taking creatine safely. So first, the researched effects. I feel like we need a drum roll here because creatine takes the gold star in my book for some of the most sought-after effects with regard to supplements. We know for sure that creatine affects muscle growth positively. We also know for sure that creatine affects strength and power performance positively. And lastly, many studies show that creatine can reduce depression symptoms in females. Those are some pretty amazing findings, and I want to give you some examples of how those things might show up in your program. First, muscle growth is pretty easy to understand. In double-blind placebo randomized controlled trials, individuals who were given creatine over a 4-week, 8-week, or 12-week period saw statistically significant increases in lean body mass compared to groups who didn't take creatine before their workouts. These double-blind placebo studies are very important because they track the changes in individuals over time, despite what they believe about what they're actually taking. With creatine monohydrate, this is relatively simple. It's water-soluble, and it's tasteless. So if I give you a big glass of water with creatine monohydrate in it, you won't know about it. Similarly, if I give you a glass of water and I tell you there's creatine monohydrate in it, again, you wouldn't know any better. And over and over and over again, whether you're a trained individual or a deconditioned individual, the effect of improved muscle growth with creatine supplementation is inarguable at this point. For example, over 28 days in a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, with both males and females, individuals saw on average 2.2 pounds more of lean muscle growth during a hypertrophy program than individuals who are not supplementing with creatine. 28 days is not a long time, and in my experience, 2 pounds of muscle growth is a fantastic difference, especially given that both groups were doing the same amount of work, while one achieved more muscle growth over the other. Researchers in this particular study credited the myostatin effect, and as we said earlier, if creatine reduces myostatin, the end positive result would be increased muscle tissue. I find this especially fascinating because in most of the research, while nutrition changes aren't accounted for between the groups, fat mass usually is. And so we find between two groups doing the same programs, the same amount of work, regardless of the nutrition intake, one group gains more muscle than the other group, and there's no difference in body fat percentage gain or decrease between the two. If one of your goals for your fitness journey is to improve your muscle growth during this phase of training, creatine supplementation is a no-brainer for you. Similarly, creatine acts as an ergogenic aid for athletes as well, particularly in trained individuals. Increases in strength and power output are both well documented with creatine supplementation. What does this look like? Well, if you normally do 200 pounds on your bench press for 10 repetitions, then studies show that creatine supplementation over a period of weeks can improve your bench press performance by 10 to 20% over your initial performance. That would be a strength measure. Similarly, creatine's been found to improve things like sprint times, vertical jump heights, and measures related to speed, agility, and quickness. I don't know how that may or may not relate to your goals right now, but for me personally as a parent, almost everything I do with my kids relates to speed, agility, quickness, and power. Jumping on a trampoline, pushing them on a swing, rolling around in the floor, or simply making sure my 1-year-old doesn't sprint into traffic are all creatine-supported performances. So if you're in a phase of training where you're working to grow strength, or you're doing power-based movements to do things like elevate testosterone, or boost your metabolic output, or be a bit more beast mode, all of these things will benefit from creatine supplementation. The last effect I find completely fascinating, and while we're not sure of the mechanism, it's well studied that creatine supplementation in females is linked to lower incidence of depression episodes, and for those currently experiencing depression, a reduction in the symptoms of depression. Again, I can only speculate at the mechanism of this sort of thing, but I've seen it in my female clients as well. As low a dose as 2 to 3 grams per day in double-blind placebo-controlled trials has proven beneficial in the symptoms of depression without the side effects commonly associated with depression medications. And while we still don't understand the mechanism for this, and more research is required to answer the strange question why it works well for females and not males who are experiencing depression, it's worth noting anecdotally that my female clients who consume creatine during hypertrophy generally see a mood elevation that I find fascinating. So the well-researched effects are muscle growth, increased strength, power performance, and reduced depression in females. Now what about the things that the jury's still out on? Well, there have been several studies to suggest that creatine can improve our cognitive output, things like focus, clear-mindedness, or attention to detail. Those studies have found a weak association with creatine supplementation at best, and more research is needed for those. Also, reduced fall risk is a thing that we're studying with regard to creatine supplementation. Wouldn't it be awesome if for our elderly population, a small amount of creatine supplementation is all that's required to significantly reduce the amount of broken hips we see? Also, there are a few studies to suggest that creatine supplementation can reduce the negative symptoms of sleep deprivation. I can speak to that personally, as I took creatine every single day after the birth of my second-born, and compared to my firstborn, I feel like I managed quite a bit better. Even though I was still a shell of my former self, I could still focus, and my mood was generally higher, despite only 2 to 5 hours of broken sleep. Other weak associations are a small boost in testosterone, a small increase in some performances that regard endurance, an increase in subjective well-being, or how good you feel today, a decrease in the amount of muscle damage, especially with regard to certain types of muscular dystrophy, and then, pertinent to me and something I can also speak to personally, is a decrease in dizziness. Dizziness is a symptom experienced often by those who have suffered brain damage. While I've had no brain damage that I know of, I do wrestle with POTS. That's postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a fun side effect of my Ehlers-Danlos. Basically, it means when I stand up too fast, I get dizzy, and I find those symptoms are generally reduced with creatine supplementation. There are a few other things worth mentioning that creatine is currently being studied for, but I won't mention them here. I've linked the summary below, and you're welcome to see for yourself some of the things that creatine's been studied for. The last thing I wanted to make sure that we covered from a research perspective is the stuff that creatine seems to have no effect on. Creatine supplementation will not improve your VO2 max. Also, creatine supplementation doesn't seem to have any effect on your stress hormone. And while we know creatine improves our ability to grow muscle mass, it has no independent ability to help us lose fat mass. At the same time, though, we know that creatine has no effect on our food intake. I mean, how can you grow more muscle if supplementing creatine doesn't actually change how much food you eat? Don't you have to increase your calories to grow muscle? I've followed that rabbit trail elsewhere, but let's just say there might be more to it than that. Again, there are a few other things that creatine has no effect on, and if you're interested, you can find those in the links provided. But now that you've heard the research, let's say you're interested in incorporating creatine into your current program. How do you do it safely and intelligently? We'll talk dosing, and then we'll talk about safety considerations and a few other things that I've learned by working with individuals and helping them understand creatine supplementation for their body well. First, creatine supplementation takes some time to build up in the muscle tissue. There was an old school way of thinking once upon a time that you should load creatine dosage in the beginning of your cycle in an effort to get more creatine in the muscles, and then you could taper off to a maintenance amount that you would continue during your program. However, nowadays we know that even a small amount of creatine supplementation over time will achieve the same amount of creatine concentration in the muscles as dosing creatine. It just takes a little longer, and really is only the difference between getting a great amount of creatine in your muscles a week from now and getting a great amount of creatine in your muscles 2 days from now. Personally, considering the kidney and liver considerations and digestive considerations that I'll talk about in just a bit, I always recommend my clients take a small amount over a longer period of time. Depending on body weight, for my female clients that's usually 3 to 5 grams daily, and for my male clients that's usually 5 to 8 grams daily. For simplicity for both me and my clients, I recommend starting with 5 grams per day and seeing how your body does with that. That's not just a stylistic choice on my part, by the way. Most of the research revolves around 5 grams of creatine daily anyway, while most supplement companies make a 5-gram scoop for their creatine monohydrate, and so then it's just 1 scoop of creatine, with no half measures or measuring out grams or anything silly like that. Also interesting to note is that the British Journal of Medicine actually followed individuals around and had them supplement creatine 5 grams per day for 2 years with no breaks. And the British Journal of Medicine concluded that there are no negative side effects and no potential health considerations outside of previous kidney or liver disease. What that means in layman's terms is that the British Journal of Medicine has concluded that it is 100% safe to take 5 grams of creatine daily for the next 2 years, regardless of gender or body weight. Now for me in my coaching practice, I generally only recommend creatine during the hypertrophy or athleticism phases of training. What that means is if I have a client who started working with me, we won't take creatine during the initial phases of training. We'll build an endurance foundation without it, teach their body to burn fat well as a fuel source, and then, once we've achieved some great training effects, we'll usually stop supplementing creatine for a short period of time before adding it back in when we come back to the hypertrophy and athleticism phases. Now I can almost hear the question forming in your mind right now. Wait a second. I thought you were all about long-term lasting changes, Alex. Why would we use a supplement to help grow muscle that only temporarily increases the amount of creatine in muscle cells? That's a great question I just put in your mouth. Let me address it here. First, studies show that unless there's a reason for you to lose the muscle tissue that we've grown, like an injury or illness, then once you discontinue taking creatine, the only thing that changes is the amount of water, not the actual muscle tissue. That is to say, the muscle tissue you grew stays around. They just don't look quite as big without the creatine. Additionally, if you've caught my previous shows about epigenetic change, you'll note that one of the things we're interested in doing in your training is not just to put on muscle tissue, but to turn on the genes that tell your body that it should continually maintain a higher level of muscle tissue. And these epigenetic changes have been shown scientifically to stick around for many years afterward. What I'm saying is, a temporary bout with creatine can create long-term changes that affect both your good lean tissue mass and your DNA for good. Arguing that you shouldn't take creatine to help you with your workouts because the changes are only temporary is kind of like arguing you shouldn't take a vacation to the Bahamas because you're not going to get to sit on the beach for the rest of your life. I don't know about you, but when I travel places, those places tend to leave a mark on me. The restoration is needed, and I get to carry the experiences with me, hopefully a changed and enlightened individual, or at least more so than I was before. That's the same thing with creatine supplementation. Once you've experienced in your hypertrophy and athleticism phases, it leaves a mark on your body in a good way. And even if you're not going to continue supplementing with creatine, those changes stick with you, like a great vacation. Now, there are a few considerations about creatine, some of them with regard to safety, and some of them with regard to psychology, that I'd like to make sure I dive in here with you. First, the main research contraindication to creatine supplementation is kidney and liver disease. If you've had a kidney transplant, or a bout with cirrhosis, or any of the other things that could go wrong with those 2 organs, it would be best to steer away from creatine consumption. Creatine doesn't inherently damage the kidney or liver, but it does ask them to work a little harder. It might be also pertinent to note that if you don't drink enough water during creatine supplementation, then when you go to your yearly with your physician, your creatinine will be a little high, and you might want to mention that you're supplementing creatine during this phase. Outside of that safety concern, there are 2 side effects of creatine supplementation that I always warn my clients about. First, a very small portion of the population report digestive discomfort when supplementing creatine. Remember, creatine doesn't just affect your muscle cells. Creatine is in every single cell of your body, and while inherently there's nothing in a creatine monohydrate supplement that should be inherently irritant to the stomach, small intestine, or large intestine, some studies have shown that a very small amount of individuals who have attempted to supplement with creatine have reported irregular digestion. I believe this has something to do with the second thing I warn you about, which is water retention. Anytime you increase the concentration of an ion within a cell or tissue, you will also increase the amount of water that's required to offset that concentration increase. In chemistry, we call this Le Chatelier's principle, which describes the tendency of a chemical homeostasis to shift left or right, given an increase of the amount of the ions. If that's a little complicated, just imagine a teeter-totter in chemistry. If you increase the amount of creatine in your cells, you will also increase the amount of water in your cells. Same thing goes for carbs, by the way. Why am I telling you this? Well, It's not a bad side effect, but if your primary goal is weight loss, and you enter a hypertrophy or athleticism phase and decide to supplement with creatine, just know that you will experience a plateau in your weight loss for a short period of time because of the water retention. Personally, over the week that I introduce 5 grams a day of creatine supplementation, I gain about 3 to 4 pounds. Psychologically for me, that 3 pounds doesn't bother me. I don't have a weight loss goal, and I'm well versed in creatine supplementation. But I've worked with many clients who are very emotionally attached to the number on the scale, and the weight gain that comes with creatine supplementation can really mess with their head. For this reason, I've warned them ahead of time and made it their choice whether or not we supplement with creatine, so that they're not surprised when the number on the scale goes up, and they're not surprised when it takes a little bit of time for the increased muscle mass to result in improved fat burn. A final note on water retention here. If you have personally lost a large amount of weight and therefore have a little bit of excess tissue throughout your body, then the increased water weight will also make you feel and look a little bloated or puffy. Your weight gain could be significantly more than my 3 to 5 pounds. But know that creatine, from a research perspective, has not been shown to increase your food intake or your fat mass. It's water weight. If you want to see the number on the scale change, stop taking creatine and wait a couple days. The last consideration I'll mention here is that you don't need anything fancy for creatine. The one I take you can get off Amazon for a relatively cheap price, and it'll last you a long time. You don't need additives and fillers, and for the effects we talked about today that are researched well, you don't need 20 other ingredients to make it effective either. In fact, with regard to other ergogenic aids, creatine puts them all to shame, which is why you'll find it in most pre-workout supplements. We haven't covered caffeine yet, but if you put caffeine and creatine together, you're basically going to be a monster compared to your former self. You'll see improved lean body mass, better workout performance, and are much less likely to report that your workout kicked your butt today. But that has very little to do with the quote proprietary blend and the fruit punch flavoring. So don't get fancy. If you want to try creatine supplementation, get a very simple creatine monohydrate supplement. I've put the link to the one I buy in the description in the show notes below, and since it's on Amazon, I included my affiliate link. Don't worry, your 12 cents goes right back into the free content of Defining Dad Bod. Now the last thing I want to talk to you about with regard to creatine supplementation is how to measure whether or not you're changing the way you would like to see. We've talked about the effects of creatine today. They're well studied, and there's no reason to doubt that you won't experience muscle growth, strength and performance increases, or if you're a female, reduced depression symptoms. But do yourself a favor and track whether or not these benefits occur in a way that you understand them. If you're taking creatine for muscle growth, take a before picture, and 8 weeks later take an after picture. Maybe do some circumference measures, or if you're real nerdy, let's get the calipers out. And similarly, for increased strength and performance, pick some measures of strength and performance that matter to you. 40-yard sprint, vertical height, 3-rep max bench or deadlift. All of these are valid ways to track your progress while taking creatine. And if you're supplementing creatine for reduced depression, how about keeping a journal at the beginning of the day where you just write your mood on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is severely depressed, and 10 is the happiest you've ever been. And perhaps even journal just before you go to bed each night about things you're grateful for today and things you're looking forward to in the next week or so. These are both well-researched ways to subjectively measure depression symptoms, and then if you need a little more objective measure, tell your spouse or a good friend what you're up to, and ask them to help you track changes in your mood. Sometimes, the people around us know us better than ourselves, and it's very possible they'll notice we're less depressed before we will. So there you have it. Creatine monohydrate is one of the most well-researched supplements on the market. It's simple, it's cheap, and it does an amazing job with many effects that people are very interested in seeing in their workout program. I use it personally, and unless contraindicated for my clients, I recommend it regularly. If you have questions about how creatine supplementation should fit into your program, bring those to definingdadbod.com/innercircle. We'll field those in our online community, and if more needs to be said about those things, I'll add to it in our monthly Q&A. That's definingdadbod.com/innercircle. Thanks so much for joining us here in our supplement series at Defining Dad Bod. If there's a supplement you'd like us to cover, go to definingdadbod.com/supps. SUPPS. That's definingdadbod.com/supps. There are many out there, some with science and many without. Let's be smarter than our supplements. This has been Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod. Until next time, guys, kick butt, take names.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The free, practical advice and conversations here remain unbought and unbiased, thanks to the support of listeners just like you. If this episode's been helpful to you, please share it with somebody in your life who you know it will benefit. Then, subscribe to the podcast and leave us a raving review to tell others what value Defining Dad Bod has brought to your health and fitness journey. And finally, if you want more Defining Dad Bod, consider joining our online community. We send a lot of free perks and resources your way, and I, Coach Alex, go live every month to talk through our listeners' health and fitness questions to make the practical science of this show applicable to everyday life. Everyone's welcome, and we'd love to have you. For more information about joining the Inner Circle or becoming a supporter of the Defining Dad Bod podcast, go to definingdadbod.com/inner circle. That's definingdadbod.com/inner circle.